for all the challenges we have faced, and all the places we have been. Azeroth's limits have yet to be revealed.
Ladies and gents, welcome back to AusGamers. You're here once again with Stephen Farrelly. We've been lucky enough to be invited out to BlizzCon, second year in a row. Thank you very much, Blizzard. I'm here with Mr. Greg Street, who you all know works on this title, World of Warcraft. A lot to talk about today. Information overload for me. My brain's about to explode.
That was the idea.
I actually managed to get some of my guys in Australia. They were up early watching the live feed anyway, to give us some questions. So. But before we get there, what I want to do is maybe for some of the guys that don't necessarily know, where did the genesis for this come from? Because, like, I kind of know, but like, let's sort of hear it from you.
Well, we had Pandaren were added as, I think, an April Fool's joke back for Warcraft 3 years and years ago, and it really hit a nerve with our players. And it's something that we kind of have brought back every now and then as a joke, and never a main part of the game. And it's something that players just really clung on to. And every time we ask, hey, what new features would you like to see in World of Warcraft? It's always, pandas, bring the pandas back. And so all of a sudden this thing that had kind of started as a joke took on a life of its own. And as we're thinking about what to do following Cataclysm, we're like, we could make a whole expansion around the Pandaren, like not just have them as a race, but go to their homeland, and then we would have all these, rich Asian landscapes and things to draw on, because we're always looking for ways to do new zones that don't look like things we've done before, and here's this whole half a world that we could draw on that we haven't done yet.
Was there ever a concern internally that, being that it was a joke, that there might be a contingent of the hardcore players kind of worried that it doesn't fit into the overall lore that you'd already created? Oh
yeah, that was a huge concern. Particularly, we were scared that once players heard the name without seeing the art, they would come make the worst conclusions. They'd think, we're going to have this like silly, what are they thinking? World of Warcraft's now just going to be a big joke. But I think hopefully today, once players see the artwork and see the videos, that the pandas have a lot going on. They have a really rich culture with a long history. They have a lot of personality individually. They like to drink, they like to sleep, but they also like to fight. And there's I think they're going to be a really compelling race. I love the animations. I love the facial expressions they have.
So was it a slow burn for you guys? Because a lot of the stuff that you were talking about today was, Drunken Master, and just like having such love for classic Asian kung fu movies and stuff like that. Was it a case of we've got this joke, wow, we could do that, or was it just a really long process of thinking iteratively about what would be the right thing to do?
No, in fact, we had already started work on a totally different idea for 5.0, and then we started to say, I think we could really do something with the Pandarans. And as soon as we started talking about it to the team, everyone's immediately, yes, that's it, we got to do that. And there was no going back from there.
Can you talk about what the other idea was before this one came in?
Not really, because we may still need to use it at some point.
Okay, so one of the other things is a lot of big changes happening with this, but you've got 4.3 coming out quite soon. Is it safe to say that a lot of the new features that you'll be dropping with Mists of Pandaria will actually be slowly iterated through 4.3, or are they two very separate drops?
It depends on the feature. Like, we are introducing Raid Finder in 4.3. We hope to learn a lot about what that experience is like, what kind of player goes and uses that, and any work out any wrinkles before 5.0 ships. But then there's things like the talent tree overhaul, which is so severe that just needs to wait for a new expansion, and we can wipe everyone clean. Okay.
Now, one of the things that one of our guys wanted to know was, you talked about having less linearity in the sort of startup experience.
Yeah.
How deep is that going to go, and what's the sort of, I guess, the process is, you kind of used one example, but with this, are you kind of retooling how you do all quest lines?
Yeah, it's okay. So the challenge of making quests is, if we make them very linear, we can tell a great story that builds up to a climactic ending, but then it's very linear, and players can't leave a story arc halfway through, or they can't jump back, or worst is they forget where they were on the story and can't catch up, or they can't catch up with their friends. So our strategy for the new continent is, each zone will have story arcs, and it might have 4 or 5 story arcs that are 20 or 30 quests perhaps. But then they'll have a lot of one-off things too. It might just be you go to a village and a villager needs your help for something, and that's the whole quest arc. And you can do it out of order, you can skip it, you can do it anytime you want. And so we want to have a lot of the old sense of discovery of, I found a quest I never knew of before, and not make it, literally you have to do every quest in order through the zone.
How are you going to write these characters into Azeroth now? I mean, are you going to have the world reacting dynamically? I mean, post-dynamically to their introduction?
Yeah, post-dynamic is the right word. We'll make it to where, kind of as the players are discovering Pandaria, we'll advance the timeline a little bit to where some Pandaren have left the continent and come to Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor. We won't flood them with it, but you might see a Pandaren, rice vendor or something in a town, and it won't be totally weird.
Now, there also seems to be a little bit of, the monk class, for example, is, it's a really good way for you guys to exploit the kind of kung fu stuff that you're talking about, but it's also a class in Diablo 3, so I'm curious to know, was it always going to happen, the monk class for World of Warcraft, or did you see what the guys were doing at D3 and just went, we've got to put that in there?
No, we talked about it for a long time. There was a debate for a long time of, do we even need a new class? Maybe the new race is enough. And then we also talked about, what should it be? Monk wasn't a no-brainer. We talked about, could we make a class that was just called Brewmaster, for example? And we talked about some other ideas like that. And certainly the fact that Diablo had a monk, came up too, but it's hard when you have two fantasy role-playing games to steer completely away from each other. Yeah. The Diablo monk is, fortunately, he's got a very Eastern European feel, so that kind of distances a little bit from our very Chinese monk.
And where did the challenge, the dungeon challenges come from?
That was a really interesting thought process. We decided that traditionally the way players would progress, they would go through normal dungeons, then they go through heroic dungeons, and they'd go into normal raids, and they'd go into heroic raids. And the problem we found was that there was this bouncing up and down of easy content followed by hard content followed by easy content, to where some players who were interested in raiding couldn't get there because they couldn't go through the dungeons to get gear to raid.
Right.
So we decided players should just be able to go into normal dungeons and then go jump into raids. And once we came to that conclusion, we're like, well, what about players who really like the challenge of being in a small group and having to use every skill at their disposal, and they might have to try multiple times before they can finally beat the boss? And we said, we can do that if we don't offer power rewards. We just have to make it prestige and bragging rights and things like that. And so that was really the genesis of the feature.
And was the normalized weapon loadout idea basically so that there was an entry point for other players as well that might not be as skilled as more kitted up players?
We really wanted the challenge modes to feel prestigious, and we you can imagine that if we have bronze, silver, and gold levels, bronze is something a lot of players would be able to do. Silver will get to be kind of more rarefied air, and then gold will be really brutally difficult. And the way to do that, if players could just wait till later in expansion and get better gear, it was going to kind of trivialize what gold meant, and then we'd have to keep track of, well, so-and-so player got gold in February when it was harder, and now it's March, so it's easier. So we decided, let's just normalize the gear, so having a gold achievement will always be an awesome thing. Okay.
And obviously, the Pokemon element. Let's talk about that. It seems like there's a lot of kind of homage there, is probably a better way to put it than taking from. But there's also an expansive feeling that you guys have just added some Blizzard in there as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about why the pet battles, and what do you think that players are going to get out of it, apart from the customizable side and I guess just being able to pit a pet against a pet?
It was a really good puzzle piece to fit in for us, because on the one hand we wanted to give players more to do that wasn't directly related to progression. We didn't want to compete for, am I supposed to get my belt from this feature? Am I supposed to get it from raiding? Or am I supposed to get it from PvP? We just wanted a totally orthogonal activity for players to do. At the same time, we had this really rich content set of all these pets, and players care about them, they want to collect them, and then they don't really do much aside from deciding, you're going to bring out your Teldrassil Sproutling or your little Tyrael or something just to show off, and the achievements from collecting them all. And then, we're all big gamers, and there are a lot of games out there that have kind of played off of this idea of raising your pet and teaching it new skills and having to go out in the wild and fight other pets. And the combination of those three were like, this seems like a really smart feature for us.
There does seem to be a pretty strong parallel to Pokemon, though. I'm just wondering, I haven't seen it in action yet. Is there any particular music that plays as you throw out your pet?
I think, like all game designers, we look for good ideas in other genres, and that's like saying that Diablo is too much like World of Warcraft because they're both games where you have a health bar and you get a sword and things like that. Right, so there's a lot of games out there that do that. We don't want to step on anyone's toes too much or infringe. We just kind of want to use features that have been shown to be really popular among players.
Now let's talk about a lot of the stuff that you pulled out. There seems to be a lot of features that have just been culled because they're either too tedious or generally don't work now as the game's kind of aged. Can you talk about I guess what was the culling process like, and how iterative was that, and how much of that was community, and how much of that was you guys internally?
So, like, can you give an example of the kind of feature?
I'm just trying to remember. Like I said, it was information overload.
Yeah.
So I think I can't think now. You know what? I'll try and remember it,
Okay.
and we'll throw back to it. And one of the other guys wanted to know the character models. Why we haven't seen like a model update in quite a while.
Oh, we really want to do that. The challenge we're at right now is that we decided when we wanted to do this new continent that we couldn't just have the same type of creatures walking around that players are used to. To feel like an exotic land, we needed a lot of new creature models. So we have a lot of tasks placed on our poor character artists to deliver on all of these, and then a lot of them need new animations as well. If you saw some of the enemy creatures we've come up with, like the Mantid and the Shah, we can't just stick that on an existing animation rig. So there's a lot of work there to do. I know the art team is still really dedicated to this idea of updating the character models, and they've started it in a few small steps, as like trials. They've been looking at the dwarf in particular, and I know the human and orc will be races to look at first. The challenge there is we know even if we update the graphics, the characters are going to look a little different, and there's some risk there that some players will say, you know what? It looks better, I like the fidelity, but it doesn't look like my character anymore. So there's a big risk there, and we've got to make sure to do it super carefully so that we don't, alienate players that have been with us this long.
Do you have, I guess, like an internal timeline as to when you'd like to do that?
It just depends on how long it takes us to make all of these other creatures we have to make relative to when we decide to ship the expansion. But it'll be an ongoing process. Even if we don't get to it right away, it's something that we'll work on to where we eventually feel like, okay, we have enough content here that we can put it out in front of players.
Okay, well, look, what we'll do is we'll leave it there. I'm going to research what it was that I needed to ask you before, okay. And if I get a chance, I might just throw the question at you, and we'll just add it to our transcript of this video.
Oh, that'd be awesome, yeah.
But once again, thanks very much. I personally am looking forward to it because what can be wrong with ninja, like Kung Fu Pandas?
It's going to be great.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks
so
very much for that, Greg. Cheers.
Appreciate it.